Ladies and gentlemen, Alapa, welcome to each and every one of you to the second installment of our study of some answered questions. I trust you are all well and looking forward to today's session here on Harry's Deepenings. We will kick off with our third chapter of this study. As we always do, we will go through, we will read the text, and then we will recap and discuss. Please feel free to raise your hand if there's something you wish to share with us, and of course, a warm welcome to especially those newcomers who have joined us. We study on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays with regards to this book, an epistle to the Son of the World on Monday, and there's a fireside on Sunday. So a lot to be done. So we will start off with our reading, and we're going to go straight into chapter 3, the need for an educator. If I could please call on Sandra to read for us. Thank you so very much, Sandra.
When we consider existence, we observe that the mineral, the vegetable, the animal, and the human realms, each and all, are in need of an educator. If the land is deprived of a cultivator, it becomes a thicket of thriving weeds. But if a farmer is found to cultivate it, the resulting harvest provides sustenance for living things. It is therefore evident that the land is in need of the farmer's cultivation. Consider the trees. If they remain uncultivated, they bear no fruit. And without fruit, they are of no use. But when committed to a gardener's care, the barren tree becomes fruitful, and through cultivation, crossing and grafting, the tree with bitter fruit yields sweet fruit. These are rational arguments, which are what the people of the world require in this day. Consider likewise the animals. If an animal is trained, it becomes domesticated, whereas man, if he is left without education, becomes like an animal. Indeed, if man is abandoned to the rule of nature, he sinks even lower than the animal. Whereas if he is educated, he becomes even as an angel. For most animals do not devour their own kind, but men in the Sudan, in the middle of Africa, rend and eat each other. Now, observe that it is education that brings East and West under man's dominion, produces all these marvelous crafts, promotes these mighty arts and sciences, and gives rise to these new discoveries and undertakings. Were it not for an educator, the means of comfort, civilization, and human virtues could in no wise have been acquired. If a man is left alone in a wilderness where he sees none of his own kind, he will undoubtedly become a mere animal. It is therefore clear that an educator is needed. But education is of three kinds: material, human, and spiritual. Material education aims at the growth and development of the body and consists in securing its sustenance and obtaining the means of its ease and comfort. This education is common to both man and animal. Human education, however, consists in civilization and progress, that is, sound governance, social order, human welfare, commerce and industry, arts and sciences, momentous discoveries, and great undertakings, which are the central features distinguishing man from the animal. As to divine education, it is the education of the kingdom and consists in acquiring divine perfections. This is indeed true education, for by its virtue, man becomes the focal center of divine blessings and the embodiment of the verse, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness." This is the ultimate goal of the world of humanity. Now, we need an educator who can be at the same time a material, a human, and a spiritual educator, that his authority may have effect at every degree of existence. And should anyone say, "I am endowed with perfect reason and comprehension, and have no need for such an educator," he would be denying the obvious. It is as though a child were to say, "I have no need of education, but will act and seek the perfections of existence according to my own thinking and intelligence." Or as though a blind man were to claim, "I have no need of sight, for there are many blind people who get by." It is therefore clear and evident that man stands in need of an educator. This educator must undeniably be perfect in every way and distinguished above all men. For if he were like others, he could never be their educator, particularly since he must at once be their material, human, and spiritual educator. That is, he must organize and administer their material affairs and establish a social order, that they may aid and assist each other in securing the means of livelihood, and that their material affairs may be ordered and arranged in every respect. He must likewise lay the foundations of human education. That is, he must so educate human minds and thoughts that they may become capable of substantive progress, that science and knowledge may expand, that the realities of things, the mysteries of the universe, and the properties of all that exists may be revealed, that learning, discoveries, and major undertakings may day by day increase, and that matters of the intellect may be deduced from and conveyed through the sensible. He must also impart spiritual education, so that minds may apprehend the metaphysical world, breathe the sanctified breaths of the Holy Spirit, and enter into relationship with the concourse on high, and that human realities may become the manifestations of divine blessings, that perchance all the names and attributes of God may be reflected in the mirror of the human reality. And the meaning of the blessed verse, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness," may be realized. It is clear, however, that mere human power is incapable of fulfilling this great office, and that the results of human thought alone cannot secure such bounties. How can a single person, with no aid or assistance, lay the foundations of such a lofty edifice? A divine and spiritual power is therefore needed to enable him to carry out this mission. Behold, one sanctified soul revives the world of humanity, transforms the face of the globe, develops the minds, quickens the souls, inaugurates a new life, establishes new foundations, orders the world, gathers the nations and religions under the shadow of one banner, delivers man from the realm of baseness and deficiency, and exhorts and encourages him to develop his innate and acquired perfections. Certainly nothing short of a divine power could accomplish this feat. One must examine this matter fairly, as this indeed is an occasion for fairness. A cause which all the governments and peoples of the earth, notwithstanding all their powers and their armies, are unable to promote and promulgate. One holy soul promulgates without aid or assistance. Can this be accomplished through the agency of mere human power? No, by God. For example, Christ alone and single-handed raised the banner of peace and amity, a feat that the combined forces of all the mighty governments of the world are unable to accomplish. Consider how numerous are the diverse governments and peoples, such as Italy, France, Germany, Russia, England, and the like, who have been gathered together under the same canopy. The point is that the advent of Christ brought about fellowship among these differing peoples. Indeed, some among the peoples who believed in Christ were so closely united as to offer up their life and substance for one another. Such was the case until the days of Constantine, through whom the cause of Christ was exalted. After a time, however, and as a result of differing motives, divisions broke out again among them. Our meaning is that Christ united these nations, but after a long while, the governments caused the resurgence of discord. The main point is that Christ accomplished what all the kings of the earth were powerless to achieve. He united differing nations and changed ancient customs. Consider what great differences existed between Romans, Greeks, Syrians, Egyptians, Phoenicians, and Israelites, as well as other peoples of Europe. Christ abolished these differences and became the cause of concord among these peoples. although after a long while the governments disrupted this unity, Christ had indeed accomplished his task. Our meaning is that the universal educator must be at once a material, a human, and a spiritual educator, and soaring above the world of nature must be possessed of another power, so that he may assume the station of a divine teacher. Were he not to wield such a celestial power, he would not be able to educate, for he would be imperfect himself. How then could he foster perfection? If he were ignorant, how could he make others wise? If he were unjust, how could he make others just? If he were earthly, how could he make others heavenly? Now we must consider fairly whether these divine manifestations that have appeared had all these attributes or not. If they were devoid of these attributes and perfections, then they were not true educators. Therefore, it is through rational arguments that we must prove to rational minds the prophethood of Moses, of Christ, and of the other divine manifestations. And the proofs and arguments which we provide here are based on rational and not on traditional arguments. It has thus been established by rational arguments that the world of existence stands in utmost need of an educator, and that its education must be achieved through a celestial power. There is no doubt that this celestial power is divine revelation, and that the world must be educated through this power, which transcends human power.
Thank you very much, dear Sandra. Thank you so much indeed. So let's reflect on this chapter, chapter 3, the need for an educator. The master starts off, Abdu'l-Baha starts off by giving the example of land, how earth needs a cultivator, someone to stop it being full of weeds. If you were to leave your garden, if you're blessed enough to have a garden and you did nothing in there, well, we see countless weeds grow. It gets completely and utterly out of control. But you have to go there, you have to pull out the weeds, you have to water plants and everything to allow that garden to reach its full potential. Even with fruits as well, we see that there's certain grafting where you can bind trees together and branches to make sweeter fruits, and this is done with the help of a gardener. Animals as well. Some of you may be animal lovers, you may have animals. I have 2 cats who spend more time with me than perhaps they should be, but these cats are trained to go to the bathroom in the appropriate spot to ensure they're clean, they're fed. That's something that I must train them, or one must train them, so you can domesticate animals. And man, in a sense, must be, one could say, domesticated, or must be certainly educated, because as the master says, we end up being even lower than animals. For example, in Sudan is stated here that, especially at the time then, even now more recently, 2015, there were cases of this, but cannibalism was taking place, where man was eating other man. And this is something that really, on the whole, animals do not do. So Abdu'l-Baha is saying, with education, well, we can become angels. We can rise to that level. And it's this education that brings together people, brings together the world. It helps new discoveries come about. It helps the advancement in human virtues and understanding science. So we need an education if we wish to become more than the animal. And then Abdu'l-Baha explains that education is of 3 kinds. There is the material education, which is to do with the growth and development of the body, the sustenance. And this is something that both man and animal has. But to set them apart then, to distinguish man from animal, we also have human education. And this is to do with the civilization and the progress of social orders, to add to the arts, to the sciences. And this is what is very much needed to help distinguish us. But there is a third type as well. And this Abdu'l-Baha refers to as spiritual education, also known as divine education. And this is what helps us acquire, hopefully, if we pay attention, if we reflect, if we put it into practice, which many of you have done clearly, but it helps us acquire these divine perfections. And as Abdu'l-Baha says, this is the ultimate goal of the world of humanity, to really attain these divine perfections. So we need an educator, Abdu'l-Baha states, that gives us all of these three things. And then he gives an example, saying that if somebody says, I have perfect reasoning and comprehension, I don't need an educator, well, that's like a blind man saying, well, some blind people can get by, so therefore I don't need any help, I don't need anything. I mean, it doesn't really add up. You're not living to your full potential. So as humans, we need an educator, one who is able to help us, Abdu'l-Baha states, with our material education, our human education, and our spiritual growth, and to be perfect in all of these manners. It is the material education that helps us establish a social order where we can work, where we can expand the sciences to try and understand the universe as much as we're able to help us grow and, again, to carry forward an ever-advancing civilization, as Baha'u'llah speaks of. And also the spiritual education then allows us to have a relationship with God, who, as is explained in the Baha'i writings, is the all-seeing, the all-knowing, the all-wise. So if you imagine you're standing at the bottom of a mountain and you want to know in which direction to go, and there's somebody at the top of the mountain who can see over the trees, well, they are, compared to you, certainly the all-seeing. So communicating with them allows you to navigate your way through the forest to get to your favorite kebab house. I am hungry. I'll be talking about kebabs today. So in that sense, one could say that by communing with God, we are able to tap into that spiritual sight, that wisdom that is out there. And that is what we are hoping to do, have a relationship with God, and therefore also reflect the attributes of God and help us spiritually grow. So it's clear and evident, Abdu'l-Baha saying, that mere human power, humans can't do this alone. And to carry out this lofty task, we need this divine spiritual power to come in. And then Abdu'l-Baha says that a sanctified soul, one freed soul, one perfect soul, can transform the planet. And this is the examples he's given. Remember, it's a need for an educator he's discussing in this chapter. And he says that a sanctified soul, such as His Holiness Christ, for example, was able to achieve something that the kings, that the rulers were unable to do, to unite people from countless countries. This is the son of a carpenter, outwardly seeming, but this is His Holiness Christ, Joshua bin Yosef, Emmanuel, who's come and he's managed to unite these people from different backgrounds, getting rid of their differences, getting them to the point where they were ready and willing to give up their lives for the cause of His Holiness Christ. When the first Roman Emperor, Constantine, became a Christian, of course, Christianity spread throughout the Roman Empire. But as we see time and time again, when man gets involved and tries to direct things, we saw splits and different sects of Christianity come about. So the pureness of it, the purity was slightly soured, and we had these different factions. And again, the purpose is to unite. So again, the universal educator, as I understand from this, must be a material, a human, and spiritual educator. And this, Abdu'l-Baha says, is what we see within the manifestations of God. And this education that we receive must come from divine revelation. It must come from God as well. And then Abdu'l-Baha asks us to reflect and say, think about the manifestations. Did they have this celestial power, this justice, this ability to make others wise, to turn the earthly into the heavenly? And he says, clearly, there is celestial power involved, and this is divine revelation that the master, as I understand it, is putting forward. But I'm very intrigued to know what you all make from this particular chapter. So I see dear Helen has raised her hand. Helen in her yellow hat. Yellow hatted Helen, if you'd like to unmute, please, and share with us your thoughts.
Yes, thank you. Allow part. I don't know whether anybody else had this reaction, and it might be confined to me, but I suspect maybe not. When Abdu'l-Baha gives the example of people in Africa, or specifically in Sudan, being cannibals, it made me feel uncomfortable. It made me sort of feel a bit, is that being racist? Saying that. I mean, the view that we've had of Africa has tended to be that looking down on the continent and feeling that people are not as civilized, are not as advanced, and that sort of thing, and that and we've had a sort of stereotypes and prejudicial view. So I mean, I suppose the point is that Africa had civilizations before many other parts of the world and was advanced. Cannibalism has existed in many parts of the world, including in Europe. If we all originated in Africa, then we are all Africans. When I read that about sort of Africans being cannibals, it makes me feel uncomfortable, because it makes me feel as though there's a sort of tinge of racism. Not that I would want to not accuse Abdu'l-Baha of racism, because that's the last thing he was. He was always promoting the rights and the dignity of people of color. But I just wanted to know if I was the only person who had that sort of reaction, and what other people think.
Dear Helen, thank you so much for voicing your opinions. And of course, firstly, Abdu'l-Baha is not saying Africans are cannibals. He's speaking at a time very specifically when in Sudan, the actions of cannibalisms were very much rife. And again, not for a second is this an African issue. You're quite right. In Europe, this has happened. But at the time he was speaking, that's what he was pointing out. And he was saying, look, because of the lack of education there, here is an example that these beautiful, noble people, and that's what they're created. They are created noble. They're incredible. There's no difference between an African, a European, an Australian, or anything like that. But where education in some areas of the bush hadn't permeated yet, well, this is what has happened to the condition of man. So, and as you've quite rightly said, dear Helen, Abdu'l-Baha was far from racist. We can look at a plethora of what he said, what he did. So for anyone perhaps taking this out of context and thinking, oh, look, he's pointing at this, well, we must always look at the wider picture of what's being said. But I do understand where you're coming from, Helen, and thank you for sharing that with us. And again, the main point he's talking about here is of a need for an educator, and what happens to us when education is not there. And that was the case in Sudan that he was bringing up and pointing out at that moment that was taking place. But thank you for those thoughts, dear Helen, and thank you for sharing what you did. Dear Shahla Khanum.
Yes, I see what Helen is talking about. I'm also wondering if in translation the meaning changed, because English language is slightly different from the Persian. And I'm wondering if sometimes in translation, and they're revising some of the translation, the Persian translation into English, the language slightly changes. And I did feel uncomfortable reading that over the years. And but I do feel that when Abdu'l-Baha was speaking, he was not putting down the African culture. I'm wondering if one of these days we could get a better sense of what Abdu'l-Baha was talking about.
Thank you very much, Shahla Khanum. To your point, that Some Answered Questions was retranslated extensively in 2014, and this is the version that we're using. So I don't think there's a translation issue with what's being said. I think it's just a fact of what was taking place at the time, and that's what Abdu'l-Baha was referring to. I mean, let's also understand that Abdu'l-Baha has spoken about the conditions of the Persians as a Persian person, what he said about them, about the conditions of the corruption in America and around the world. The fact is, there wasn't a place on the planet that was perfect, and it's because of this lack of education. And I think that's the point there. But thank you very much, dear Shahla Khanum. We have 3 more hands that are raised. I believe Empire, who is from the Democratic Republic of Congo, would like to share something. Dear Empire, please.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, dear Empire, yeah.
I don't know if it is allowed, but I'm feeling like I want to laugh a little because, and you know, I think racism exists only in Europe because here the topic is lack of education, and the example is people who do cannibalism, and the recent people who was doing cannibalism, they was from South Sudan. Anyways, there was in Sudan one tribe in Sudan. I mean, recent people who are still doing cannibalism. Why? Because of the lack of education. For me, there is no problem. So I think it is something that is in our minds. It is a poison. Maybe for us also, we have that lack of education. Maybe if we start to consider all the races as one, and the world as a garden, and the flowers, like it's saying in the white, we will not be saying, we will not be talking about
Thank
the
you.
world racism will be eliminated.
Excellent.
I'm sorry.
Thank you very much, dear Empire. Thank you very much indeed, and your thoughts are very much appreciated. Thank you so much. We'll move on to dear D in the States. D, please, if you'd like to share your thoughts.
Yes, Alab. Hi, everyone. If I may change the topic a little from cannibalism, I just wanted to clarify because it's not too clear to me. I understand that there are 3 types of education: material, human, and spiritual. Now, the spiritual, that's pretty clear, but the human, Abdu'l-Baha says, consists of civilization, its progress, social order, industry and arts and science. So that seems to me more of an intellectual kind of education. I could be wrong, and that's what I need clarification. But the human education is one that I'm having. Sorry, the material education is the one that I'm having a little problem with, because Abdu'l-Baha says it consists of securing its sustenance and obtaining the means of its ease and comfort. This education is common to both man and animal. So when I read that, I thought of this education as a means that mankind needed to survive, and that was a kind of adaptation kind of education. So I'm having a problem with the material education and the human education. So if the friends could shed some light on that, it would really be appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you very much, dear D. Yes. So spiritual education, of course, you've understood quite clearly, and the human education is the civilization and how things progress in systems. But human education, as I understand it, so when it says securing its sustenance and obtaining the means for ease and comfort, so really that to me, it speaks to me, and I'm sure others of you have different thoughts on that, but that would be to do with how we need to perhaps exercise, or how we need to eat, and what we need to do to stay alive, to sustain ourselves, things that we should eat, and it deals with that, which animals need as well. And I think that's all that is dealing with. So one could argue, I don't know, perhaps not drinking, is that part of the human education of, to not intoxicate ourselves, so we behave in certain ways, being given these guidelines? I don't know. We can see what some of the thoughts are, and I see some hands have gone up. In fact, if there are any hands that have gone up in relation to what Dear D has just asked, I see Furus Honum and Sandra, your hands have just gone up. If they're related to that, please feel free to unmute and respond to D and share your thoughts.
I think it's I don't know if anybody's heard of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. The first level is basically being able to survive. So to have somewhere to shelter, to have something to eat, that kind of stuff. So it's, and once you've satisfied those baser needs, vital needs, then you can move on to the higher level needs, because we do have a need for creating beauty, being able to make things, etc.
Yeah, when we read the Baha'i writings, we have to realize that our own shortcomings and our cultural preconceptions. It's not like a Western religion. It doesn't use all the vocabulary and concepts of the West. We have to be able to understand more deeply what is the intention of what's being written and said in the Baha'i faith.
Thank you very much, dear Alex. Thank you. Next comment, dear Furuswan.
Yeah, I'm aware of the time, Dave. I just wanted to say that Abdu'l-Baha was not partisan. And that was a subject which was discussed by Josh Lincoln when he was launching his book last week. The book is being translated both in Arabic as well as Hebrew in order to show the peacemaking efforts of Abdu'l-Baha. And I think when we look at his life, whatever he says, I mean, just think of the Romans who would watch the epistles of the Christ being eaten by these ferocious animals. I mean, just looking at it is worse than being a cannibal. Right now, I can bring your attention to what's happening in my country, in Iran, in Abdu'l-Baha's country. People will take food and they do picnics and they go where the young people are being hanged, as if this is a picnic. So I think cannibalism has different meanings and different connotations. Thank you, Dave.
Thank you very much, dear Furuswan. Thank you. And I do hope that this this particular chapter that we've read, we don't get too stuck on this cannibalism thing. Again, I believe it just to be an example of the lack of education, and that really is what we're really focusing on here. The three kinds of education that are needed: this material, human, and spiritual. And the point that Abdu'l-Baha is making really is we can see from the examples of what, and he mentions His Holiness Christ, what he's achieved and how he's been able to transform the world in his dispensation, and what he's managed to do, and how Christianity has been such a powerful force. Of course, everything has its winter season as well, where things do sadly get corrupted by man, and therefore there are actions that are carried out that aren't in accordance with the manifestation of God. So again, I do hope the main purpose, the main point of this chapter was something that we reflect on, and the fact that this evidence that Abdu'l-Baha is putting forth is about the education that is needed, the need for an educator. He's talking about it, and then he gave an example of His Holiness Christ, and there will be more examples as we go through these chapters. So thank you all for joining us, and we will end, as we always do, with offering anybody who wishes to share prayers to do so. Thank you for your reading, dear Sandra, and everyone's comments, of course. We will be back tomorrow with our study as well, and on Sunday there will be a fireside, which please do join us with the same link. But if anybody wishes to share any prayers, the time is now. Thank you.